Hey everyone, welcome to another live Q&A from the group here at Soulbound Studios. Today's live Q&A is on our latest Chronicles of Elyria adventuring journey, our adventuring path, which is actually related to our Friends and Family release, which is the release that we're working on, or have been working on for the last couple of weeks, and we'll be continuing to do so over the next couple of weeks. So to follow form, based on our last Q&A, we've got an introduction section where I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about things. We're going to actually meet our newest person on the team today. I'll introduce these two in just a moment, and then we'll move over to that. And then we will be turning things over to Twitch for our live Q&A question and answer. And I believe for the Twitch Q&A section, our behind the camera host, our secondary host, Kaizen, will be actually reading the questions off to me since I don't have my tablet with me today. Like I said, we're going to be doing our live Q&A. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is Jeremy Walsh. I'm the creative director here at Soulbound Studios, and I'm joined today by two of my esteemed colleagues. On my right, I have Nathan TripNull Hitchcock. He's our client engineer here and has been working with us actually since the beginning. TripNull is one of the original team members. Not that the length that you've been here is necessarily too important, but it's an honor to have him still with us after 2 years now. So, and then over here on my left, we have our newest employee here at Soulbound Studios. He's known throughout our community and the revival community as Snipehunter. So Snipehunter is Adam Maxwell.
That's me.
He's brought on as the lead designer here at Soulbound Studios on Chronicles of Elyria. So we're going to be focusing on him quite a bit today, actually, because nobody's seen him on camera here with us before, and I'm sure that there's a lot of questions that people have for him, and I have a couple questions for him myself. So let's kind of talk about what we're going to talk about, if you will. We are going to break up today's live Q&A into a couple different sections. The first thing we're going to do is actually do a quick Snipehunter segment where I'm going to ask him some questions and he's going to tell us his thoughts and maybe see if there's any questions on Twitch or not that we can follow up on. Then we're going to move over and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've been working on in terms of our adventure. And then I'm going to transition over to TripNull and let him talk about what he's been working on in particular, because he's got some very cool stuff. And then if we haven't had a chance to pass it over for Twitch follow-up questions, then we'll definitely have a segment contributed just towards Twitch questions, and then we will wrap it up with a quick conclusion. All right, you guys ready? Thumbs up on your computer screens. We'll just assume that you guys are giving me a thumbs up. Also, I'd like to call out for a moment that I have my Kingdom of Lorvascar mug right here, so shout out to the Australians over there who sent us this mug.
It's a pretty dope mug.
I've shown it on TV before, but I have like 30 ounces, or on camera, but I have like 30 ounces of Coke Zero in here right now, so I needed a very large mug. All right, guys, let's go ahead. So, Snipehunter, let's actually let them get to know you a little bit before we start talking about what you do here. And the question I have for you is, tell us a little bit about what games you're playing right now. Let's start with that. What kind of games are you playing right now?
So I actually picked up Fallout 4 again recently. I had never bought all the DLC. I've probably put like 700 hours into that game at this point, but I never actually played the DLC, and I got it all pretty cheap on a sale recently, and so I was like, well, I'm going to play that.
Nice.
Fortunately, I'm stuck right now playing everything on a 13-inch Surface Pro, so I play it at about 12 frames a second.
You know, there's such a thing as after hours. You know, you can always use your work computer after hours.
Yeah, I haven't gotten around to installing Steam here yet.
All right.
But yeah, so that's been the big one, and I've been playing a lot of little indie games too. Every Friday I play Clone Drone in the Danger Zone with some friends, and this last weekend we played Jackbox games all night until like 1:30 in the morning on Saturday. You play those games with like a bottle of something on the table.
Right, apple juice.
Right,
exactly.
Apple juice,
right.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, you mentioned Fallout. As a follow-up question to that, have you played a lot of RPGs? And if so, which I assume you had, are there any RPGs that you felt were particularly applicable to how you go about looking at things as a designer?
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of the Bethesda open world games. Some more than others, to be fair, but the Elder Scrolls have some of the best lore out there in RPGs. Likewise, the Witcher series is basically amazing. And so I tend to start when I look at RPGs by seeing how they build their world and then seeing how the mechanics sort of support that version of the world. And both of those companies, CD Projekt Red and Bethesda, kind of just have that down. And so I spent a lot of time sort of dissecting the tricks that they use to pull that kind of stuff off.
Nice. So for the audience that's out there, another follow-up question. We typically categorize designers in a couple different ways. We usually have like writers or narrative designers. We have like mechanics designers. We have world builders. There are technical designers that work on like the technical aspects and scripting the world. How do you categorize yourself? What do you think when you think about like what kind of designer I am? Where do you think your strengths are?
So I spent a lot of time working on systems design. It's not necessarily like what I set out to do originally. When I first started being a game designer, I was like, I want to come up with cool ideas and just make the game, right? But the truth is, to make that happen, you have to know how, systems work, and you have to understand how engines interact, and you have to know your constraints. And by the time I figured all that out, I realized what I do is basically make the rules for games.
Sure.
So I tend to think of myself as a systems designer. I do a lot of writing too, though.
Awesome. Are you looking forward to doing some writing for us?
I'm doing some writing right now.
I know you are. I can't tell them what you're writing, but I know you are. All right. Well, aside from the writing you're doing right now, what do you plan to contribute in the immediate? Like, what is your short-term goal here for us?
So I want to make things easier for everybody. A big piece of what we're doing is that we have a whole bunch of features and systems in this game, and they all got to work together right. And so I want to kind of be the guy that makes sure that all of that gets divvied up right, and that it's everybody has the information they need. And so I'm trying to insert myself in that process basically,
Sure.
so that I can start taking the load off of you. Honestly.
Yep. No, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you this then, as another question. What do you think has been the most exciting thing about being on the team? I mean, you've been here for a couple weeks now.
Yep.
What's been the most exciting thing about being on the team?
Honestly, just watching everybody work.
Yeah.
I've worked on a lot of different teams at this point. If you go look up my Moby Games page, it's absurd. But everybody does things differently, and some better than others. And when you have a big ambitious project and a small team, that can be a warning sign. But I watch everybody here work and the way we plan our ventures, and it's awesome.
I think in the Morpeg article you did, you said we ran like a well-oiled machine. I think I'll accept that. That feels good. I'm okay with that. What has been the most overwhelming thing since you've been here?
Just the scope. I mean, honestly, I worked on a project with similar goals, but we didn't have some of the resources that Elyria has, and so we can push things that we couldn't on that other project. And so it's like standing in front of the cosmos and going, well, I've got to describe this.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, we talked a little bit about your short-term goal. What's your long-term goal? What do you hope to contribute, and what do you hope to achieve here that let's say somebody else couldn't have, or we couldn't without you?
Well, I want to make Elyria real. Like my goal, just as a designer, is I want to make virtual worlds that are living, breathing, real places. And so, my goal here is to make that happen, to make Elyria real. Yep,
make Elyria real. I love it. Like I had mentioned before, there was actually an interview with me on what I thought about having Adam Maxwell here, Snipehunter, and I'll reiterate now, I'm extremely excited to have him here. He's already starting to help take the load off of me, and having somebody that I know is my lead that shares my vision for how the world, not the game, but how the world should run, it's a huge relief for me, and I'm very, very excited to have him here. Last question I wanted to direct towards you, and then we'll move on to kind of some of the stuff we're working on, is obviously the community that we have here, many of them are familiar with the project you were working on just before this, Revival. And so a lot of people, I think, want to know, what are some of the parallels that you see? What are some of the key differences that you see? And kind of what do you think we should look out for that's similar and different, I guess,
right,
is the summary.
Absolutely. Yeah, so with Revival, we had a lot of really similar goals. What I'm finding, as I dive into the sort of specifics here, is that we keep coming to them, from different directions than Revival did, which gives you different capacities. A good example is, the narrative engine, right? We had this system called tags, but tags are basically game flags on steroids. They're a simple mechanic, sort of, with a little bit of added intelligence, so that you can do things people didn't expect out of them, right?
Sure.
We didn't have a full-blown narrative engine, but we do here, and that gives us all kinds of capabilities that we just couldn't do on Revival. There are ways to have people live their lives even when they're not playing, and we just couldn't do that. That's amazing, right?
Sure.
And so I'm really stoked about that. But on the flip side, there are pieces of tags that could do things that we can't here, and so I'm kind of hoping that there's a chocolate and a peanut butter moment here where we can sort of take a little bit of what I learned there and the awesomeness that is our technology here and realize an even more perfect version.
I love the peanut butter and chocolate analogy, just because I always talk about Chronicles of Elyria as kind of this artisan chocolate, of the MMO genre. It's that thing that's, it's richer, it's deeper, it's more meaningful.
Absolutely.
And I love that idea of just sprinkling in that other ingredient that just makes it that much better. So, awesome. What else? Are there any other like parallels between Revival and COE? I mean, obviously we're in a different genre. You've got fantasy versus
Right.
kind of a gothic horror. Anything else that you can think of?
Well, yeah, we wanted. I mean, we wanted a living, breathing world, just like Elyria, and so we had things like we were modeling weather, and here we're modeling weather.
Sure.
There's a lot of like, if you were to take the sort of genre skins off the two games, they would almost be identical twins. Almost. It's sort of they're chiral in a way, left-handed and right-handed.
Right.
But yeah, and so the parallels are everywhere.
Now, do you think that that's going to be? Do you think this is a trend? Do you think we're seeing the beginning of a new genre here, like Dota and League of Legends, and kind of this introduction of kind of early MOBAs? Like, is this something new?
I hope so. I really do. I mean, I'm not the only person who's a fanatic about this. You talk to people in the community, both here and on Revival, and people have been pining for this idea for a long time now, for decades, and so I would love our efforts to be the start of a new renaissance for this stuff, because I want more. I want an infinite number of virtual worlds.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is the beginning of something new. I think that this idea of an online living world isn't something that we had the resources or the technology to do before. It requires a heavy level of simulation. It's not something that we either knew how to do or had the computing capabilities to do so. But I think we're there now, and the technologies that we have available to us really make that possible. So I'm very excited about it. I'm glad you're excited about it. Let's talk about something else. If you have questions for him, make sure you do keep those written down. What we'll do, I think, is that in the Twitch Q&A section, we'll try and target those questions at first. So we'll ask if there are specific questions that people have for Snipehunter, and then we'll move on to kind of the stuff that we're doing for our current adventuring parties. But for now, I want to go ahead and move on to the adventuring partying stuff, so do make a note of those questions. So, what are we working on? So as kind of in relation to what we posted in some previous blog journals that we did, and that Kaizen had mentioned, is that we do our release planning right now by setting up a set of releases that we need to do. Our current release is what we're calling the Friends and Family release. And so within that release, we have a series of adventuring parties that are created where each one has a set of objectives that they're trying to achieve by the end of the release. And ultimately, the release is marked by all of those objectives being completed. We actually can't complete the release until those things are done. So I wanted to take a moment. We already posted our kind of adventuring overview, but I wanted to give you kind of just a bullet point list again of some of the stuff that we're working on and why it's important. But I'll save the last section, and I'll actually pass it over to TripNull to talk more about that. So I don't lose this, I'm not just going to throw it over my shoulder, because I am going to need that. I might find something else to do with it later, though. All right, so one of the important things we're working on right now is account creation and account management in general. Internally, we've been testing our ability to connect and log into our game for a while now, but because we're running locally inside of a kind of a on-machine development stack, we actually haven't needed to validate login names and passwords against any kind of centralized backend. And so one of the things we're doing in this release is making sure that we're actually hosting offsite, not on our local machines, on a location out on the web, so that players can actually log in remotely using our authentication information on our actual website. So that's super important. Without that, we don't have the opportunity to let anybody into it, let alone friends and families or you guys. The other thing we're working on right now is the ability to obviously log in, switch between the characters that you have available to you in-game, taking a look at your character sheet in order to see what attributes you have and things like that, as well as kind of going through the character creation process. Now, for the release that we're working on right now, the character is actually being pre-generated. You hit a button and it will create a generated character for you, but it does have all the same elements that we're looking at for the final game. And so it'll have things like their skin and skin color and the skin textures and hair color and facial features, facial hair, a slew of things, all of the proportionality between their bodies because of the different tribes, whether or not they have long arms or short arms or tall spines or short spines. And what that does is it allows us to very quickly see the various tribes in the game moving around, and you get this kind of breadth in the world, as now there are players and NPCs that are all made up of different kind of looking characters, mostly players. So that's that. Then we get into kind of the world entry stuff. There's a series of things that need to be set up. Up until now, we've had the ability to play the game in small sessions. So we would bring up a server, and as long as the server was up and running, then we'd be able to play indefinitely, and the world was stateful, and we could bring new characters in and stuff like that. But because it wasn't stored in a centralized backend like we are now, it wasn't persistent. But now we're moving to a point where it's all persistent. So when the characters actually log in, even when they log out, even when we bring the servers back down and then bring them back up again, the world stays preserved. So this is the first step in actually having the truly persistent world that we've been been dreaming about. So a lot of this sounds like it's fairly early in development. It's actually not. What we've been doing actually for a large percentage of our development time is making sure that we had infrastructure in place, a back end, and a client that would allow us to iterate on game design very, very rapidly. And Nathan actually has been a big part of that. And so now we're at that point. So we've mentioned this before, that with our focus on Elyria now, or the renamed Vox Elyria, with our focus on Vox Elyria, we're going to be doing a lot more gameplay mechanics, and they're going to be coming very, very quickly with rapid iteration that's allowed by the fact that our technology can do the things that we need it to do. So, yeah, a lot of the core foundation, you got to lay the cement before you can start putting up the walls, and now we've done that. So now we get to the fun stuff. The last thing that we're working on right now as part of our current adventure party, which, like I said, is focused on our friends and family release, is all related to the terrain, our physics system, gravity and locomotion, and kind of all that stuff. So I'll set the notes here in case TripNull needs to take a look at any of that at all, but I do have some questions. So, tell us about what you're working on.
All right. So, for the last couple weeks, week or two, we've been working on terrain stuff a lot. We had terrain before, but it wasn't dynamic streaming down in chunks from the server, and we couldn't cache it client-side, we couldn't modify it, and so a lot of what I've been doing these last couple weeks has been like getting the quality of terrain that we've seen in Unreal, like built by hand and sculpted by hand from Zach, getting that same level on the server and then streamed down to the client in chunks.
Now, why do we need to stream it down to the client in chunks? Why can't we just put it all on the client? Isn't that the way everybody else does it?
Well, I mean, it's just a lot of data, right? It's just too much data to store all at once, and we don't want people to wait for the download time for chunks that they're never going to see, right? And so it's kind of an optimization, being able to say, like, I'm in the world at, like, wherever, right? And saying, I need, like, the 10 kilometers around me, not the entire, like, 512 kilometers, the whole continent or whatever, you know? So, so that's been a big part of it. It's been dicing up the terrain that we already have, and then streaming it down.
Right. So yeah, we've talked about this before, but because our world is so large, it's not possible for us to actually ship that on the client. Like, do you know offhand how big that would be? I think our entire world. Is it in megabytes, gigabytes, or terabytes?
Well, we're playing with exactly how much data we have to send to the client, and how much we can kind of interpolate or like approximate, and so it would be a lot. Yeah. Either way you stretch it, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot. Like.
It's a lot.
Hundreds of gigs.
And since we don't have, most MMOs, if they don't pre-download all the terrain, they actually can still identify where the starting settlements are, because you've got starter zones and things like that. And so even those can be shipped as part of the client install. But we don't even know that, because players can literally create characters anywhere in the known world using the family system. And so since we don't know where people are going to be, there's no opportunity for us to kind of pre-ship that stuff. So we have to be able to stream it all down efficiently.
And I mean, even if we knew where those things were, people can still deform it. It changes. Right. It's not just a static thing, and so that makes it really, really hard for us to just ship like the terrain. We've discussed ideas of like snapshotting, like delta changes all together into one like preset seed kind of thing that we can then ship deltas off of. So we can have like we might be able to ship like the starting terrain and then send down just the changes, but we're still R&Ding that kind of thing. So right now we're just we're querying into the database for the most recent terrain chunk.
Sure, makes sense. So we talked a little bit about terrain download. We've been doing some stuff with terrain generation too. Now, you talked about how we've got Revantiel's like handcrafted terrain and stuff like that. We spent a lot of time in our prologue working on making sure that we had an area called Titan Step that was mostly hand curated. We've also got our terrariums that we've been doing. And do you know a little bit about, I assume you know a little bit about what Revantiel's been working on with the terrariums?
I know a little bit. I know he's been working on getting a lot of different biomes and stuff, and terrain types and foliage types and stuff laid out. And I think the idea is that we'll take those assets that he's crafted and those like terrain styles and materials that he's crafted, and then we'll tie it into our dynamic terrain system. We're trying to generate it all at once without having to have him go in and hand edit, so we're trying to find ways that we can like signal where to put these assets that he's building with the generated terrain thing. So.
Yep, absolutely. So similar to what TripNull's talking about is that we had previously hand curated the terrain there. We've got a system in place. We have a workflow now that goes all the way from procedurally generated all the way into the engine now, thanks to the work that you're doing. And now we're just mostly working on, I think Revantiel, who's also working on this stuff kind of at the same time as you as part of that party, is creating a series of biomes, terrariums. We've picked 5, I believe, right now, biomes that we wanted to go into a little bit greater depth. And so he is actually going through and again doing a combination of hand curating, getting feedback from us, and then we're using that to update the pipeline, the tools that we're using in order to procedurally generate the world to make sure that what we're procedurally generating looks like what he's envisioned as part of that terrarium. So that's what that is. Tell me about physics. What are we doing on the physics right now?
Well, we had our client-side prediction system, and that worked pretty well for the jousting demos and the demos we were playing. But one of the places that it's kind of lacking right now is the client-side, the actual prediction part of it. We have lots of physics predictions, so it can receive physics updates from the server and then approximate where you're going to be over the next n seconds. But we didn't have like simulate on the client and then just try to like approximate using client-side sims and then reconcile those two sims together. And so that's another part of what we're doing. We're adding, we're generating collision data for the terrain, and we're also allowing players when they input moves for the client to actually do them preemptively before it knows that servers authorize them.
Right. And
then we can reconcile that together to have a better client-side approximation of the server state.
So what does that better client-side approximation mean to the players? How's that going to affect them?
It's a smoother experience. It means there won't be any latency between your actions for your character and potentially other characters. You don't have to wait for the server to give you back what actually happened. You can kind of like predict, and ideally it means that there will be it'll just be a smoother experience in general.
Nice. Well, that is obviously a very good thing.
Yeah.
So with so many different things in an adventuring party, because we're talking about, we've got character creation stuff that we're doing right now and all the different character attributes. We've got the login and authorization system for external people. We've got the terrain and physics stuff that you're working on. How does the engineering team go about kind of allocating those different tasks to different people and making sure that all that work is being done in a way that's synchronized? Like, what's your workflow like as an engineering team?
As a whole team, I guess that really comes out when we're going through sprint planning, discussing, first of all, who has been working on, like recently, on systems that are relevant to the tasks, and then kind of like discussing who would be the best person to approach the next system we're working on. So it's very collaborative in the beginning. We're all kind of all engineers, so we're okay passing systems off. We're all very familiar with all aspects of the engine, and so it's really just about who's been working more recently and in each system, and then also who is some systems like build systems and stuff. Not a lot of people have touched, and so there might be like one person who's like the build guy, and he gets pulled over on build stuff, or like website people, right?
And who is the build guy, Nathan?
I'm the build guy, yeah. But Steve is the website guy, and so he gets pulled off onto web stuff a lot too, and so it's kind of like we have to shuffle some people, but mostly when it comes to game stuff, we're all kind of all the engineers, and so we just discuss and allocate that way.
So, as a follow-up question to that, you said you're the build guy, and you've been working on terrain stuff. What's one system that you have not gotten a chance to work on yet that you would like to get a chance to work on?
I'd really like to work on more on the contract system and player-to-player contracts. I feel like that's going to be a really fundamental part of player-to-player interaction.
Sure.
And so that would be where I'd love to get like a month or two to just focus and try to like really make that streamlined interactions, make it a flexible system so that people can build on that and we can evolve that really nicely. And yeah, so that's really that's part of the game that I'm really excited for, and so I really want to spend time.
What do you guys think? Flexible contract system? I think you guys are fans of that.
I heard
right?
a boo.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Came over the internet. They're like, we don't want a flexible contract system. Okay, cool. And then, are there any, besides the web, are there any systems that you are dreading? Like, are there systems that, as an engineer, you're like, that's a super complex system. I know it's going to be a deep dive for me. Or for somebody on the team. What system do you feel like is one of the most complex systems we're going to be working on? If not in this release, then
I'm not afraid of any of the systems.
That's good.
I think we're all really they're all really engaging because we have solutions for them. We've discussed, and it's really just about will it perform up to spec, and are there any hitches that we run into? And so we're at a point now where we have a solid enough grasp on all the systems that we can just start like developing on them and improving them. I think that the place where it's going to be the most difficult, there's going to be the most performance hitches, is going to be the later iterations of combat. Like really trying to get the action, like the live action responsiveness, like the responsiveness of hits and stuff, and that will again tie back into the client-side reconciliation and prediction, and that's again why I've been working on it recently, and why I feel like the prediction is also something we're going to come back to a lot.
Yep.
It's improving the prediction and reconciliation for every system, and combat is going to be a particularly perf-heavy and volatile system, and so those two systems kind of play together to make the most complicated one, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, thank you for telling us a little bit more about the terrain stuff that you've been doing lately. You guys will no doubt hear from TripNull again. Our next adventuring party will proceed on right after this one finishes, which I said is in a couple weeks, and then he's got a whole backlog of all kinds of other cool stuff that we're working on.
The backlog never ends.
But for this release, which I said is our friends and family release, the goal is that by the end of this release, that our friends and family can go to our website, a special website, not the official website, but a special website we've got set up to allow them to register an account, and they'll be able to log into the world, they'll be able to enter, they'll be able to create a random character that's generated using all of our attributes and stuff that define the different tribes. They'll be able to load up in the world, they'll be able to walk around, they'll be able to check their character sheet, they'll be able to sprint based on their character's actual attributes. It'll control how fast they move and how long they can run before their stamina and vitality, or stamina and energy starts to wear down, and then and that's it, and then log out for now. But that is the foundation, folks. That is the beginning. We're working our way towards getting you guys into a pre-alpha. For those in the community who are Alpha 1 backers, we'll be getting access to the Vox Elyria client of Chronicles of Elyria sooner than the rest, and as soon as we possibly can. Cool. All right. That's all I had prepared ahead of time for me. So let's turn it over to Twitch. Like I said, we've got questions, no doubt, about Snipehunter, about the terrain and stuff we're doing for our current adventure. So let's get some of those questions. Kaizen.
We have a question for Snipehunter right out of the gate. The
Excellent.
Horse Lord asks, will you be working on religion in Chronicles of Elyria?
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
So for those of you who don't know, Revival was very much a game of darkness and religion and different philosophies and things like that, much like Chronicles of Elyria. So I'm sure that Snipehunter is very excited to be working on the religion system. So
we have
yeah.
cool religions too,
Yeah.
just in general.
Yeah.
I can't wait to dive into some of them. I don't want to preference anything by.
And you may or may not be working on religion stuff right now.
Right this very moment.
Right this very
yeah.
minute. That may or may not have been what we were talking about earlier. Other questions?
Yeah, we have a question for you. Caspian Holy Avenger 1 asks, how much of the back-end game data persistency has been tested for robustness and resiliency at this point?
That's a great question. So a lot of our community know we are partnered with Improbable, the developers of Spatial OS. And so we actually have two backends we have. One of our backends is Spatial OS, which we use for all of our spatial data that we can use to pass between different worker processes and stuff like that. But the one we've been working on more recently is related to things that are not spatial in nature. And the reason we've been doing that is that while Spatial OS is great at handling all the data associated with traditional gameplay, there's a lot of things like AI, our account and login system, and things like that aren't spatial in nature. And so we've had to develop an infrastructure that allows us to quickly pass data around within our own network as well as back and forth between spatial. And so with respect to spatial, obviously we've got a very solid framework there, and we have no doubt that the technology can do what we want it to do. We've yet to stress test the performance at scale, so that's something that we're going to need to be doing in the not too distant future. But at least for the stuff that we've been doing locally and on site, it feels very good. We've had dozens of people now into our network on a relatively small map moving around, and horizontal scale out for us is very easily done as a result of spatial. So we'll see.
We have a question from a Smart Cow. Smart Cow asks, how will Vox Elyria play into the progression of our actual full-fledged characters in Chronicles of Elyria? Will this be a part of our family history, or will it be strictly kingdom and gameplay development?
So that's a great question, and I think I'm looking at the camera, but I made the mistake of glancing at the stage lights, and so all I see is this big blue square right now. So Vox Elyria is actually the name of our client that we use to access Chronicles of Elyria's backend. And whether or not we're talking about Vox Elyria or talking about our Unreal UE4 client, it's ultimately the same game. So what you're really asking is what data is going to persist at what point, and in what way is it going to persist? And so to answer that question, we actually have broken this up into really 3 or 4 phases. The first phase of testing is our kind of alpha and pre-alpha Vox Elyria phase, in which case our alpha 1 backers and our alpha 2 backers will probably be getting in earlier. Nothing persists during the Vox Elyria test phase. It's really just about us rolling out the gameplay mechanics as quickly as possible, getting player feedback, creating a 3D chat environment for them to hang out in rather than Discords of Elyria. It'll be fun to just kind of get around and move around, but it's not going to persist. The next phase after just kind of the pre-alpha and alpha Vox Elyria stage is what people are referring to as Kingdoms of Elyria, which coincides with our alpha 2 milestones and releases. And Kingdoms of Elyria does have information that persists. And the idea is that, at least at the macro level, the things that you've done in Kingdoms of Elyria in terms of like alliances that have been formed and battles that have happened and things that would normally be considered the last 50 to 100 years of history will carry over from Kingdoms of Elyria into the game. It's our intention that it also be the micro things like roads and buildings and things like that, so that as you build up settlements, that they actually do exist for not Kingdom Domain section, but they exist in exposition. The last phase of that is exposition, which is a period of time that's a couple months before the actual launch of the game, in which people who, whether or not they participated in the Kingdoms of Elyria or in our Alpha 1 backing of Vox Elyria or whatever, whether or not they're in that or not, if they're in exposition, they get to come in and use their exposition points to help us build the world and make it even better. And of course, they're going to be inheriting whatever the state of the world is at the end of Kingdoms of Elyria, which is exciting because it's not what we created out of the gate, and it's not something that players are getting to like curate and manicure in exposition. It's what we've created combined with what the players did to each other over the previous year, which I think is, it's more like reality. When we as nobility, I say we, but in our world, if we were to inherit our parents' titles and take over their lands, we didn't get to choose, and there certainly wasn't some divine being that said, when you inherit the world, it's going to be just like this. It's based on all of our past experiences. It's a cumulative history. So obviously exposition, the things that people do will carry over, and you will be playing in the Kingdoms of Elyria game, you will be playing as your ancestors. We have a new currency that we've been working on called remnants, which basically acts similar to sparks of life, but they're just for your ancestors, and they don't cost anything. It's something that we're giving you guys. You can get more if you decide to do stuff stupid in Vox Elyria and Kingdoms of Elyria, but the idea is we just give them to you on a regular basis so that you guys can play like you want to play and write the history, and that should be a lot of fun. I think that answered that more than.
Cool. Aethelstan asks, in Vox Elyria, will we be able to amass NPC loyalty that will last until exposition?
Probably not. So again, going back to the first phase, nothing carries over from the alpha and pre-alpha phase, and in Kingdoms of Elyria, the NPCs are all assumed to be dead before we get into, well, not assumed to be dead, but many of them, especially at the beginning, will have grown old and died by the time we get into exposition and launch, because there is even a gap between exposition and Kingdoms of Elyria. There's a small gap there.
Bright Ward asks something for Snipe. What's the largest snipe you've ever hunted?
At the risk of jinxing things, world-sized. The largest snipe I've ever hunted is the Quest for Virtual Worlds.
Ooh. Interesting.
Cool. Let's do one more question, then we'll wrap it up. This question is from Deletherius. After Kingdoms of Elyria comes out, will infrastructure built by players or communities in Vox Elyria persist in exposition and the actual game?
We addressed that in the last question. The goal is for buildings and structures built during Kingdoms of Elyria to persist into exposition.
And we'll do one more. How about Devil Abagor asks, are there any features that you know that will not be included or tested in Vox Elyria, example, sieges, and that will only be tested during the COE alphas? So I think they're looking for, are there feature-specific testing during the different phases?
So there's a couple things to point out. The first of which is the division for us between the kind of the Alpha 1, Pre-Alpha, Vox Elyria client is that it doesn't contain anything related to settlement building, settlement management, land management, leasing, zoning, settlement building, laws and the justice system or anything like that. So it's really the components of Chronicles of Elyria that you would expect to find in a more traditional MMO. Now, we're obviously doing it our own way because we have our own quests and story engine, we have our own combat system and things like that. But it's the mechanics that are different. That's the division actually between Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 as well. So Alpha 1 is mostly focused on the Unreal client, on the features that we would normally have in a traditional, more traditional MMO. And Alpha 2 is focused on things like blueprints and structures and settlements and buildings and things like that. To the question though, in that first half, when we're focusing on things that are not kingdom and land management related, we plan on rolling out the mechanics because we developed them in Vox Elyria first. That pretty much all of the features will be there. The one caveat is there are several things that from a user experience standpoint need to be different in Vox Elyria than they do in the traditional UE4 client. Combat being a good example of that, crafting being another good example of that. So while we'll have the same ingredients to crafting, like crafting components and crafting materials and crafting patterns and all those different things, while the ingredients to that will be the same, no pun intended, while the ingredients will all be the same, the actual user experience and how you go about crafting might be different. It's similar to combat. While we might have combat techniques we may or may not have parrying and blocking and dodging, and the way in which you input those things won't necessarily be the same. In fact, it's highly unlikely that it'll be the same, just because the camera angle is different and what we're trying to achieve with those are different. The whole point of Vox Elyria is to not have to spend a ton of time on user input and user experience. So those are things that will be different between the two. But beyond that, I mean, aside from the individual user experience, the mechanics we hope are in parity between our Vox Elyria client and our Unreal client at Alpha 1. Cool. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up from here. Expect a production update coming in the next few weeks. As we talked about before, our first goal is to give you guys a write-up of what our adventure is like, and that was provided by Kaizen earlier this week, I believe, or last week. The next step is for us to do a Q&A. Here we are. And then after that is Vi's first production update. Per our Jousting production update, I expect you guys will see more concept art. You guys will see probably some early graphics and renders. She might even show off some new animations. And then you'll have to wait until the end of the party to really see the video of what we were able to achieve during this current adventure. But either way, it should be exciting stuff. I want to make an announcement. Don't forget that we have a Let's Play next week. I know a lot of people in the community were excited about that. We are playing, what is it called?
Town of Salem.
Town of Salem.
Oh, nice.
Town of Salem.
I couldn't remember what the first word was. Yes, Town of Salem, which is
I forgot it too.
it's like a one-night werewolf, one-night vampire kind of game where there's the potential that somebody there is a vampire or werewolf type creature, and then everybody else is trying to figure out who it is. So that should be a lot of fun. Several of the people here at the studio are going to be participating, along with a large number of the community members as well. So we'll be streaming that. So even if you didn't make it into the cut and you aren't going to be joining us on camera as part of the stream, definitely make sure you tune in and watch it. And more information is already being posted about that, and I'm sure that there'll be another announcement next week before we get into the actual Town of Salem game. All right, guys, thank you again for joining us for this Q&A. As usual, if we didn't get your questions answered, or if you have more you wanted to know, don't hesitate to take the questions over to Discord. I will not be able to join in Discord immediately after the Q&A today, but the gentleman beside me will probably be able to jump into Discord for a little while after this in order to answer your questions, which can then ultimately be put inside of the Soul Chamber for us to have a record of. But that being said, it's great being back on camera. Enjoyed an opportunity to chat with you guys again, and we'll see you next time.